So, this is first time I'm giving a talk like this, and then I thought, okay, really, how should I approach to this presentation? Because I don't want to come here and give you sort of common sense recommendations, tips, which is not going to be very useful. And why it would be common sense? Because really grant writing is widely different, right? So when you think about, and I'll show you some of those funders in a bit, there are a wide variety of funders, and how you write your grant, depending on who you are writing it to, it's going to be different, right? So I thought the best way to approach this is probably I will walk you through my experience, my specific experience. Instead of starting general, we'll start specific, learn some lessons from that specific, and hopefully we can generalize it. And then hopefully that way we can avoid this common sense recommendations. Two, I was just telling Ryan that I didn't time myself. I don't know how long this is going to take, because I thought this will be more of a question answer. So I'm sure that you guys have a lot of questions, hopefully. So we'll go through these slides. Hopefully we'll have some time and you can ask your questions as I'm going as well. And then we'll do a Q&A. So first tip, write to your audience. Your audience, actually, maybe this is not exactly correct. Write to your funder. Who is your funder? So your audience here, I'm referring to funder. There are really a wide variety of funders across different fields of economics. If you're, food and agriculture, you're probably writing a USDA, or even, in development as well. USDA provides a lot of funds. NIH in health, EPA in environment, NSF, more basic research. You can have industry funders, Pepsi company, Cargill are among the funders here, even on campus. Or you can have nonprofits such as Gates Foundation. Now, each of these institutions are different. Some of them are public, private, and obviously nonprofit, right? They are, you can have exact same question. But the way that you're going to pitch it, who your audience is going to be way different, right? So it is important first to start with who you are writing to. In a bit, I'll show you one of my funded research, which we were looking at economic viability of organic farming. And the idea was, okay, let's estimate organic premiums for produce at retail, because organic food consumption is increasing so fast, but the organic farming is not keeping up. So it was a policy relevant, and there's USDA policies in place that sort of incentivizes organic farmers to transition. Anyhow, I don't want to get into research much, but you can ask the question as economic viability of organic farming, and sort of pass through of those price premiums, where your focus is mostly the stakeholders who's going to be impacted from that kind of research is going to be farmers and organic, say, product consumers, or you might say optimum pricing of produce. Now, who is your stakeholder? Is the retailers. Because optimum pricing is going to, should you price each produce item differently, product pricing, or should you price them categorically, right? Or organic prices as a category versus conventional produce as a category. Each of those pricing strategies might end up with different profitability. That question, you send it to the National Grocers Association. They might be interested with that, because retailer group association. USDA is not going to be interested. USDA say, well, why should we fund this? This is the main stakeholder here is the private companies. right? So the way that very similar questions, the way that you frame it is going to be very important. Know who you are writing it to. Second, what are their mission and their priority areas? Why should they care about your research question? Now you might say, well, how is that? The funder does funder not know? No, it is not only that you need to know this, but also you need to put this in your grant, saying that this research proposal falls in XYZ priority areas. Specifically, it is important within that priority area for XYZ reasons or the stakeholders that are being impacted. Why this is important? And then especially with the normal grants, reviewers not going to be in your areas. Okay. And the reviewers gonna come in, everybody has their past experiences with research, they have their own biases not in a not in a negative connotation. Their biases as in, they have their own criteria. You want to make your proposal sort of prone to reviewer criteria. It must be reviewer might come in there, might have read priority areas, but they may not remember, or they did not do due diligence. They may not know the priority areas. You gotta make sure that you put the priority area there and explain why it is important, so that it is clear to the reviewer, right? So you cannot take the risk assuming that reviewer actually understands what your research question is there. Okay. Where do you get this information? Ryan.
So just a quick question on the reviewers. So when you submit to say, like a journal, there's a lot of concern for the reviewer on the methodology and making sure this is really sound research. For this, my impression had been that it's about novelty or some sort of interest, or what are the criteria that, unless you're going to get to this.
We're gonna get it.
Okay.
Yes, you're a few slides ahead of it.
Yeah.
Extremely important question. That is I think that's my third tip. So we finished the first tip, right? The first tip is who you are writing it to, why they should care. Okay. Second tip, how you should write it. Right? You're gonna get to the what you're going to write. That is the third tip. So how you should write it? You should follow the directions. You cannot just go ahead and just write whatever you like. And so this a difference between writing a research paper and the grant is in the first step, right? With the research paper, that before I'm sort of stepping back here, let me go back to the first one because I think it is important to make this distinction. With the research paper, we have our own idea, we put that in context, and then we pitch it as in, okay, this idea is important because, and then, our audience is academics or what the stakeholders are. Here, you may have one of the best ideas, but when you write the grant proposal, your funder is not going to be interested in the general interest in your idea. They're going to be only interested in their own interests. So your idea must fit their own. That is sort of the main distinction between you're writing a research paper and writing the grant proposal. They might say, well, that's a great idea. Good luck, you're publishing it, say, at AER, but unfortunately we are not interested in. Okay, so interest is important. Now, how are you gonna write it? Carefully read the request for applications. Every grant, proposal or the funding agency is gonna have an RFA. They might call it differently. They might call it RFP, or call for proposals. What does an RFA describe? It describes priority areas, eligibility criteria, funding amount, and specific requirements, right? Formatting, page limits, sections, subsections. You gotta follow these, exactly. That is how you write the grant proposal. Really, if you do not follow it exactly, it is possible that it will not be even reviewed. So they say it is 18 pages. You wrote 20 pages. People might get upset with that. Reviewers say, well, this doesn't follow the directions. Okay. So let's look at what. So I said we will do. We will go through specific examples or my specific experience. Hopefully, that would be more informative. This is what an RFA for a NIFA looks like. Again, well, I mostly work with NIFA, so I'm gonna work on that, and hopefully, every agency is going to have their own. You'll see, this is from 2017. I looked at my other, every year NIFA publishes this. I think the one I was successful in the 2017, this was like one of my successful proposals. I must have read it very closely because I have saved this one. I usually don't save them. It's just like, online. I'm glad that I, have saved it. So let's look at it. So here we got, it says that these are the following. This is a long document, right? I'm just going to show you what matters mostly. It does list the priority areas. You will figure out, okay, which priority area is mine. When I look at this, I say, okay, agriculture, economics, and rural communities is where my research is. So it fits the priority area. That is great. Okay, so then let's look at the table of content. In the table of content, this RFA is long. You don't need to read every single because there is like a lot of legal language there. But the parts that are relevant, you have to know it really, you have to follow it really carefully. So it starts with funding opportunity description, so program area description, that page 7. See, there are 50 pages of program area descriptions. There are those area priorities have at least 4 or 5 program areas within each. So you're going to go and find which one is yours, and then once you look at the program area description, and we'll do there. So that is number 1. The second one here is the part to look at is this content and form application submission. This describes how you should write your grant proposal. Okay. This describes who you should write it to, what do they care about, and this one is going to describe how you should write it to. Okay, and then we're going to come back to evaluation criteria. You should really pay attention to this sort of when writing it, because that's how going to evaluate it. You can write it, read that criteria, evaluate it yourself before submitting it, right? So that is how that's going to describe what you should be writing. Okay, so let's look at program area description. So I think it's like one that I checked out. I think it's like around page 40. There it is. So agricultural economics rural communities. Okay, it will talk about what this program is doing, their priorities here, the description. Okay, and then how much they are funding. But then they will be like, so when you write it, you should be, once you write your research questions, so these are the priority areas, you should relate your research question first, saying that it falls in that program area, and then you should relate it to one of these, okay, closely, so that the reviewer understands this is relevant, right? Because the first question they're going to look at, is this a relevant research proposal? You should make that very clearly. And then I usually submit within the economics, markets, and trade. There are 4 or 5 of those under there. And then I'll go and read economics, markets, and trade program area priority. And then I would also make sure that one of these, like my research question, is very closely related to one or more of these, and I will write that. Okay, right.
Yeah, so in the proposed budget requests, it tells you that like what your project maximum budget can be, like how much I can request. But then throughout, and I've seen this in other ones, they tell you how much money is available.
Yeah.
What information does that provide me? Like, why would I care that they have $18 million if I can only request 500,000?
It's just this is legal document.
Oh,
That's
okay.
very good, right. So, it's just sort of they're disclosing. There's a public agency, they are disclosing.
Okay.
Private agency may not be doing that. Some people might. But you're right. What is relevant for you is this. 500,000. You cannot budget more than 500,000. And I'll get to that. Does it gonna make difference whether you budget 400,000 versus 500,000? My answer is no. But I'll describe that in a bit why. So this is the number that you should be caring about. So that is actually next. We're going to talk about the criteria, how they define and how you should be writing it. So this part, any questions here? So this part that I am showing you is about who you write it to and why they should care. Okay. They should care because they care about these things, and your research question is exactly addressing that, right? Why they should care. Next, how you should write it. So that takes us to their description, which is, I think it's like page 60 something. All right, content form of application. Songy, hold on, let me find this. I'll be with you in a second. There you go. The project narrative attachment must include, if applicable, that is not applicable, that is not applicable. We'll start from introduction.
Yeah, what if my research question was in 2 areas?
Apply to one. Yeah, apply. So within the, I think, okay, it depends. Now, if it is within the 2 areas of, no, let me see. If it is, say, markets and trade area, and all those bullet points under markets and trade area, whichever those bullet points were the topics that are covered, and whichever the topic will be reviewed by the same panel within markets and trade. Okay. This is okay, 64. Let me go back. So now coming back now, let's go down this. So there is a panel. Okay, there is a panel that evaluates all proposals that are submitted to this economics, markets, and trade, right? Because when you submit it, you have to add this area priority code. Okay, so that panel is going to be different than this panel. Okay, so if you think your proposal equal, then I would say, go ahead and submit. There is no restriction on submitting, to 2 different panels. But I don't know. So maybe there is, because you can't be funded for the same proposal twice. So there are some restrictions on that. I think you can. I'll be surprised if you can. You're going to just submit it. Which one do you think is going to be most relevant and has a more likelihood of being funded, and then submit to that. You might tweak it, add different objectives, do different things. It's not the exact same proposal, but although similar, it's a different proposal, then submit that. You had a question? No? Okay.
Inside, you pick 2, like you have big area, you pick 1, and then inside you can pick 1 or 2, or is it?
No, you just submit it to one. You would have one proposal. You would either submit it to social implications of emerging technologies or markets and trade. Like these area codes, each of the program areas is going to be different. I don't think you can submit one proposal to multiple area codes. Okay, you're gonna be submitting. You're gonna choose which area code your proposal is most relevant and submit it there. Okay, so going back, formatting 60, where we are. All right, so, and I'm gonna show you. So I submitted this proposal with that RFA. Okay, This was on this, we completed this research, it's done. We got a couple of papers out and there might be one more. But see, introduction, I have introduction. And then within the introduction, I am making sure that these estimates of magnitude, like this 1, 2, 3 are addressed, right? So I'm not going to read things here. But then rational significance, okay, rational significance. 2.1, rationale behind the proposed project, rationale behind the proposed project. 2.2, the specific, so you get the idea, right? So I am going one by one, 2.3, and then I get to approach. This is, so follow it very closely. Now, this is how I approach it. Not everybody does this, right? It is not like there is no rule, as in if you don't write it this way, it will not be it will not, like, you can organize it. You have to still have each of these. You still have to have the rationale and the approach, and under the approach, describe the activities, methods, expected results. Like, you should still need to do them, which I do, right? So, objectives, and then I go methods, and then after that, expected outcomes somewhere. There it is, expected outcomes, and so on, and follow that. But I follow it exact same. It is possible that you might reorganize this if you think it's going to flow better, but you have to have every single of them so that, reviewers can benchmark it. I actually, the reason, so that is one, the reason like I brought it. So for example, this one, the way it's asking is like do objectives first, then methods next. Typically in a proposals like this, you don't want to have only single objective, right? So you want to have one overarching objective, economic viability of organic farming. Wow, you can write a book, right? It's not a single research question. It is just this general overarching question. And then identify 3, 4 specific objectives that is going to help you to achieve those overarching questions. So when you do that, I actually prefer to organize this as, this is objective 1, and this is method 1. This is the method we are going to address this objective with. Then objective 2, this is the method we are going to address objective 2. That's how I like to organize it. And usually, so for example, this one, is effects of California drought on specialty crop markets. This is still ongoing. Xinyan is helping us with this project, and it's exactly like that, right? So here's the objective, we state the objective, and then we talk about the methods and preliminary analysis, and I will talk a bit more on the importance of showing preliminary analysis. Okay. Let me pause a second here and see if you guys have questions. Yeah.
Data, because we are gonna get it as a part of the grant.
Yeah.
Preliminary.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have the data, but you know where the data is, and you know what the data is, and you know what are you going to be able to with the data, you should document all that. Like, you gotta be convincing the reviewer that your research is not up in the air, right? Yes, you don't have the data. Yes, you haven't done the preliminary analysis, but the reasons for that is data requires a sort of a priority data. It's accessed through a specific portal, and you are in progress to get permissions. You gotta document all that. Even if you don't have the data, you gotta document what's in the data and how is that information in the data is going to help you, so that you convince the reviewer is actually, if you get the grant, you will be able to do what you're actually proposing. Using preliminary analysis is exactly that, right? So, I mean, think of it, no one is willing to, whether it is the government or private organization or a nonprofit, The number one concern is risk and reward, right? Yes, they want to do projects that has high merit, right? But it's a great idea, everything's up in the air, that's not gonna fly, that is high risk. You may have a research question that is, I mean, you cannot have a trivial research question, but, better than, like, way more better than trivial. It's nothing earth-shattering, but it is, say, relevant, for applied research as such, and it is well-grounded. The risk is small. How do you show it is well-grounded? Those preliminary analysis, right? The preliminary analysis and data will convince the reviewers that it is well-grounded. When we do the criteria, and I'll show you a lot of criteria. Among all the criteria, there is one criteria that I highlighted, and that is this one. You're showing preliminary. I value the most. Not every reviewer might, value the most, but I think it is important to show that your objectives are feasible, right? It's not just cheap talk. Like, you know what you're talking about, and you have convinced people that you can actually achieve it. Follow the directions. Okay, great. So we are right at your question, Ryan. Now, and that is my third tip. Pay attention to the evaluation criteria. I've been actually on both sides of this process. I've submitted, maybe 5-6 times to NIFA, and I have been serving on the panels about like 3-4 times, maybe more. This evaluation criteria is okay. So let's go back to the RFA. I'll actually come to this slide, but the one that I put in the slide is what I think sort of most valued in review panels. Okay, but before getting to what I think, let's see what the evaluation criteria that is suggested by RFA says, and that is here. Okay, so every RFA that this, NIFA RFA does this, and I think that most RFAs would do as well, will have evaluation criteria. And this one, for example, number 8, scientific merit of the applications for research. You're gonna look at novelty, innovation. They use, like, obviously the language here, don't get stuck. I don't know why usually the language that they're using is not very clear. But what this number 2 means is that it is gonna be it's applicable, like transfer of knowledge from given the systems of organism, importance to U.S. agriculture. Okay, so we learn something, but we should also be able to transfer it or apply it, right? Conceptual adequacy, clarity, delineation of objectives, adequacy of the description of undertaking, demonstration of the feasibility through preliminary data. That's where it comes, right? So it is very important to show that your objectives are feasible. That's where the preliminary comes in. Probability of success of the project is appropriate given the level of scientific originality and the risk-reward balance. Meaning that only success, you might have 100% success, but like it's not going to fly unless it has scientific merit. Scientific merit is first. Okay, it should be original, innovative, a problem that everybody cares about, and a problem that when we learn is going to be impactful, but it should be feasible, right? Merit first, feasibility second, but both needs to be there. That is. What else? Well, here, qualifications of the project personnel, right? So there's not much you can do with that. I mean, well, you can when you are choosing your team or collaborators, you can be strategic, and I do that, and I'll show you how I do that in a bit. And the project relevance, which we talk, you're gonna make sure that you explicitly write what the program priorities are and how your research question addresses what is written on the program priorities, okay? And the project relevance. So these are the main ones. And my impression serving on these review panels are, like, there is quite a bit of overlap, but let's go one by one. Number one, relevance to program area priorities. Make sure it is there, and you should, like, while you're writing, you gotta make sure that you are writing these. So keep this criteria in mind, but even after writing, go back to the criteria and apply the rubric to yourself, right? Clearly stated objectives, objective 1, objective 2, clearly stated feasibility with strong, that's why it's highlighted. It's really important that you convince the reviewers. They're gonna give you hundreds, thousands of dollars. No one wants to risk money, right? You should be able to convince them that you could actually achieve it. Realistic work plan. What's the work plan? The timeline. How many years you need to complete the objectives? Who is the personnel? How did you allocate the budget? These all should be consistent with each other. Okay, your budget allocation should reflect what your personnel is, and so if you have, say, budget allocation for 2 years, your timeline is 4 years. It's not gonna work. You say your personnel, you are, say, PI, but you did not budgeted salary for yourself. It's a big red flag. It's like, then okay, who is going to, if you're not going to invest time in the project, who is going to, right? So as a PI, you have to budget salary. If you're running a field work and so on, you have to budget personnel salaries. That's who's going to run the experiments and field work and so on. All of this has to be consistent with each other. And then the overall merit. What we are really looking at the overall merit. Why is it important? The motivation should be clear and well done. Why is it innovative? Like the research paper, you gotta have this contribution statement. Okay, it must be clear. Is it rigorous? This is again like the research paper. Math is going to matter. Okay, so it cannot be just. It must be technical. Okay, but technical doesn't mean that you fill it up with formulas and everything. No, you're still going to use a lot of English. It needs to be paragraphs and so on, but it must be technical. Okay. If it's too mathy, reviewers might not actually read it, right? So they want to understand the intuition behind it. Why do we care, about this problem? What is the impact? Who's going to benefit from this? Okay, you should be very clearly say that, say, with the organic farming, for example, farmers are going to benefit. So what is the new knowledge? Like, who's going to benefit most from the new knowledge? And what's your outreach plan? I will show you in an example. For example, this proposal said, well, it is important because we are going to generate a data set that is going to be adopted by so many researchers in their academic research. It is a great output. Everybody cares about that. But if you don't have an outreach plan, no one's going to believe it, right? So how are you going to do it? Yes, okay, so you're going to generate the data, but how are you store that data? How are you going to make it available to all other researchers and so on? Okay, so those are merit. Gonna make sure these are there. It must be, of course, well organized, thought out, written clearly, concisely, flows well. Gonna make sure there. But again, you always put importance on substance rather than style. Right? Don't get buried, like spend days on style. Style is, yes, important. All of this, you know, important, but spend more time on substance. Make sure that you are able to convince the reviewers. Again, it must be technical, but not necessarily filled with math. Keep in mind, reviewers are not going to be the ones in your field. Most likely, reviewers going to be obviously, you know, economists, but in different fields, they might not have any idea about your research field. For that, what is the strategy? Always rely on the economic intuition. They are still economists. Yes, they don't know the institutional specifics of your field. Make sure you know you clarify those institutional specifics, understanding that these like do not assume that people know what you know. Okay, make sure you clarify those and mostly rely on economic intuition. Methods are important. But if you bug with a lot of math and sort of incomprehensible methods, reviewer is going to have a lot of suspicion, right? They should understand it well. Okay.
So like follow up on that, like to what extent like switching the methods, you have to link it with like economic problems or theoretical framework that can justify, how you come up with your hypothesis.
Right. It's two ways. I usually do conceptual discussion verbally, right? So we say, okay, here is the problem, and then so this is why we care about the problem. But when we approach this problem, say the hypothesis is let's say direction. It could go in, it might be in positive direction for A, B, C, D reasons, or it could be in negative direction for other reasons, right? So now we're conceptualizing why, say, let's say we are interested in a relationship, why that relationship may have, based on economics, may have different signs, and how those different signs might have different implications. That's why we need to understand what this relationship is, and you can do all that by just conceptualize it by discussion. And then once you do that, you come to your empirical model. There you're going to use math. I don't usually use theoretical models, because these are really, these are, if you are doing NSF, you're probably gonna do the theoretical model. That is basic, that is the most funding basic research, right? So, but here, it's not the basic research that's mostly funded. It is the applied research, the impact to stakeholders, okay? So I focus on the applied part of it, and I do not put a lot of emphasis on the theory part. If you write NSF, then you're probably going to put your models in there as well, so that what you're talking is more precise, not just a description. My last step is on budget. Main items, we don't use labs on, some, if you're doing experimental economics, you might, but most often you don't. Certainly I don't. So my main items in the budget are personal costs, that is PI, postgraduate RA, data access or purchase. If there's field experiment, you will need to budget that. If there's the equipment needed, you need to budget that. Travel, you need to budget that. What matters when you do the budget, you gotta make sure it is consistent with your narrative, with your timeline, right? So that I just mentioned. If you are running a field experiment, you gotta have a budget for the field experiment. If you mention it in the narrative, the reviewer will want to see it here. If you need some special equipment that you mentioned in the narrative and the objectives, the reviewer will want to see it here, right? So it must be consistent. What doesn't matter is the amount. Okay, the reviewers, I'll be with you in a second, are not judging whether this budget, the amount of the budget are reasonable or not. The reviewers with the USDA grants, other grants might be different, are judging the merit. They are ranking the proposal based on merit. And then after they are ranked, whether or not they are going to be funded or how much they are going to fund it is someone else's problem, not the reviewer's problem. Okay. So if you are budgeting for USDA, what is the maximum? 500. Do your budget 500. It's gonna make no difference whether you are the 400, 500, right? Make sure the merit is there. Do it 500 and send it. That again, that makes no difference, but it must be consistent. Yeah, data access or purchase. So some data is priority data that you might need to purchase it. So Anna is working with some data now that she can only connect to a portal. So, but then the portal has fees, right? So then to access that data, you will need to budget the fee to pay the full of that portal.
You also send the data.
Okay, and then for field experiments, like if, for example, like you field experiment, do I need to attach the IRB with the portal, or that's something that's after, that has nothing to do with it?
That is definitely part of the SPA that you would need to do. It's a good question. That I read like different proposals gonna make sure they will definitely have. I didn't need to do that. That's why I don't have the exact information because I never used human sample. I'm usually secondary data. But the proposal, the RFA is going to have specific information on that, whether or not we need to include the RAB part of the proposal or not.
About 10 minutes, but then we can just take Q&A after that.
Yeah, very good. So no, I think I am done. So I have like final thoughts. Yes, chasing money is important. Funding your research has a lot of perks to it. You get salary, you get to work, with collaborators, with grad students, but it must be driven by your passion to the topic rather than the funding itself, right? So the research drive should come first. The incentive of funding should come second. Why? Because you're making a commitment for so many years. It will be really excruciating if you don't like the research, because you will need to get the work done, right? You are committing, they're giving you money, you will need to get this done. So make sure the proposal that you are submitting is not just for the money, you are excited about the topic and you are willing to work on it for so many years. I have been stuck with not so many times, but at least once I have been stuck with the research proposals, like, when am I going to finish this? So build collaborations meaningfully. Project director or co-directors matters. My strategy is my research is policy relevant in food and agricultural markets, and almost all the research that I do, there are colleagues at different government offices are also interested in the topics that I am doing. So I am reaching out. I have collaborators with all of my NIFA grants. I have a collaborator from USDA ERS. Okay, so and they are interested. We are interested in the same topic. That's how I approach to it. Collect and submit support and reference letters. It is important. This goes on to your question. Like you don't have the data. Well, that's where the support letters and supporting information comes in. You have to convince them. You are planning on collaborating with an institution, get a reference letter from them, right? The show that the reviewer that the institution is willing to collaborate with you, and they have resources that they are willing to share with you. Okay. You are planning obtaining or accessing data, add documentation. right? Everything, like whatever that, data access documentation is needed, Adam, mention that in the narrative, and then add the documentation to the appendix. A lot of reviewers don't look at the appendix, right? So don't trust on reviewer to do like complete due diligence. Make sure that it is an important that's right out there in front of their eyes. The proposal is directly impacting some stakeholders of the funder. Get a support letter from that group. So this now what I'm talking, the group that I'm talking here is that are not involved in research, okay? But they would really like that research to be done. So they will just write a letter saying that, okay, we support this. This is a great idea. We would like USDA support this. Who might be that group? So we had say food bank, right? So you are doing a research on food insecurity related to food donations, and that research might be directly relevant to food bank operations. So you might reach out to food banks and get support letters that will go in there. Or you have research that is related to producer group, although it is not funded from them. You gotta be careful there. If it is like directly a research idea that directly impacts them, they might say, well, let those guys fund it. It's a bigger impact, but partly also that producer group is interested, has vested interest in that, get a support letter from them. That's all I'm gonna say. Here, actually, a lot of funding agencies do have documentations like this. I actually found this out this morning, right? How useful it is, I don't know. Let's see. We can go through and then see if I left out anything. Like find the right program, RFA, become a student, read the RFA carefully, develop a timeline preparations, yes. Criteria, understand criteria, read the RFA carefully, understand review process and reviewers. We just covered that, right? Logically, clearly, prepare a budget with strong justification, covered that. Optimal critical input experience, successful colleagues. Yes, we did not cover that, that should be good, right? So this is your first, say, proposal. Reach out to, one of your, could be collaborator if you're a collaborator, but someone who has experience in the field and not collaborator, you might also ask their input. Make sure all the forms are filled out completely. Yeah, the project team has all the expertise. Write clearly, do not assume, don't use those acronyms, that's bad writing anyhow. And then the rest is just writing, right? Learn about review process, that's also important. So I think we covered all the tips here that NIFA is putting out. There could be resources like this for other funding agencies as well. Okay, basic.
Okay.
No, please.
So for when you're identifying why research is important, how do you walk the line between I work with the SNAP thing, stuff, criticizing efficiency versus addressing the need for your research when you know that there's maybe people at the USDA who might take it personal that you're identifying problems. How do you walk the line between identifying a problem versus being aware that you're reviewing your grants might be have someone been tied to that problem?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't really much care about, I don't really much care about those sort of a political correctness and things like that. If you think you have it's all merit, right? It has to be all scientific, right? So I mean, I don't try to be politically correct, and you should not be either. So if the research question is relevant and we don't know the answer, and it is important for policy reasons, for participants of SNAP households, you just go ahead and write it out. They like it, they like it. They don't like it, they don't like it. Like, I don't try to walk a line between political correctness and what I think is important. If I think it is important, I just write it out, and some people may not like it, that's fine. Yeah.
So after PhD, with lack of experience in writing, what was your strategy when you write grant first?
Very good question. So the first, I started small. The first grant that before coming here, I had a very little grant writing experience in Saskatchewan. There was a internal grant that I write, and that was because internal, there wasn't much scrutiny, but still you need to write, a lot of these elements must be in there too. In Minnesota, the first grant I wrote was grant in aid. So this is provost office provides for assistant professors that in the first 3-4 years can apply. It's for a short, it's a small amount, like $30,000-$40,000. So that's kind of like where I got the experience. You still need to, follow, a lot of the sort of the principles that we discussed here for that too. Same year, I applied, I think I applied 2 NIFA grants. One early researcher NIFA grant. I followed like, everything. It was a short, so I wrote the grant, submitted to grant in aid here in Minnesota, and then I expanded a little bit, submitted to NIFA. I got the grant in aid. NIFA said, no, thank you. And then there was another grant, which is a bigger one. So that was sort of an early researcher grant. It's like 10-12 pages, because they have like different grant types as well. There was another grant, which is like a regular grant. This was like regular 18 pages. I had a collaborator from ERS, wrote it up, spent a lot of time. I was upset when it was not funded, because like these things, it does take time. Like I feel like, especially if you don't have now I can write them fast, but when you are like, first, like, really writing them, it takes like 2-3 months. I mean, when I say fast, even now, like, it will take me at least a month, to write a sort of a really good one. So that didn't get funded. With both of them, I did not have the experience of like, that highlighted like the feasibility. I don't think I had done good job to convince the readers. Maybe the topics maybe it wasn't very good either. But the preliminary data analysis and feasibility wasn't very emphasized in both of them either. In the third one, I knew I had with the example that I showed you just now, the viability of organic farming. With that one, I knew I had a good research question. So I spent quite a bit of time on that to make sure that I am checking every dot. And I included a sort of serious sort of preliminary analysis. There also you need to be careful. Like your preliminary analysis cannot be too like, reviewer shouldn't be saying, okay, you answered the question, what now, right? So it should be like a proof of concept, right? So it's like, you show the proof of concept, it's like, okay, this is why it is feasible. So it took a while. I wasn't successful right off the bat. Like it's definitely a learning curve. It does require some investment. Like, again, my early applications weren't successful. Now I think so far I have like 4, and I feel like comfortable. I hope like as the ideas come through, hopefully we'll get more of them. But again, it's just keep writing. Keep writing. So you have a good idea. Make sure that again, the first tip, make sure that like you're writing those priority areas and why it is important, who you are writing to, and why they should care. The second tip, how you should write it. Follow the instructions very closely. And third, what you write is follow the criteria, like make sure, like understand what the reviewer's thought processes are. So that, you're tailoring to that.
I have a few
Yeah.
questions that I wrote down.
Yeah.
I'm hoping we can get on
Yeah.
record. One was, could you speak a bit more about like pilot grants? So submitting to a grant specifically so that I can get more grants, right?
Right.
Get it started.
Yeah.
How is that different and what is like the strategy for that?
So that is actually, so I've done that kind of with the grant in aid. So grant in aid is the university program is sort of like a small, and in that grant, and I was saying that, okay, here, this is my research proposal. I want this much amount. However, here is the potential where this research proposal is going to grow, right? So in this research proposal, say that I have one objective. However, I'm going to use this money to do this preliminary work, ABC, that is required for me to put this larger proposal, right? So those are kind of like a pilot ones that I approached with the grant in aid that didn't work out for me, right? So I got the grant in aid and then did some preliminary work and wrote that bigger, proposal, sent it to NIFA, and didn't get funded. But that's pretty much how it is. Like, with the pilot, apply to pilot, but those are not terminal, right? So in your research proposal, you should be explaining how you are going to use the money to do preliminary work that is needed to compete for the larger grant.
Hmm.
That's pretty much, and you should convince reviewers like how that's gonna happen.
So there's another, it's two questions, but they're kind of interrelated. One is, so you have your research question, you really like your idea, and then you go out shopping for places where you can get funding for that. And their priorities are slightly different. The questions that they're going for are different. So could you maybe talk a little bit about how you take your research question and you intertwine it so that you answer their questions, but you can still get your question out of them?
Yeah.
And related to that is also, say you get funded for a question, but like you get through it a bit and you find out that's not the interesting question.
Yeah.
Like there is something, so how do you go through this adaptive process where like, you get these reports where you
Yeah.
have to send it to NSF every
Yeah.
year or whatever, and you say, well, actually the question is different now.
Yeah, no,
And
great
different
question.
methods.
Yeah, no, great question, because like, it's this research is kind of a living organism. It unfolds as you progress. So you gotta tailor it. I don't know how you would tailor it. You gotta tailor your research question to what your funder wants, right? It won't work. So it is again that the example of who is your funder with the whether if you're funding it, again, if the research question you send it to USDA NIFA, it didn't get funded, and then you say, well, I'm going to send this to Gates Foundation. You will probably spend another month and a half. There is no, okay, if I have the research question, it's not like the research paper, right? I send it to AJAE, didn't accept it, I don't even touch it, and then now, send it to the food policy. Like, you can do that with research papers, not with grants, right? With the grants, you have to read what the funder wants, their priority areas. So even if NIFA rejected it and you're going to repackage it for somewhere else, you're probably going to spend a lot of time to tailor it to what they need. It just needs to be done.